Classical Christian education has become one of the fastest growing movements in America and around the world. Yet, if you ask 10 people what it actually is, you're likely to get 10 very different answers. Is it about the great books, or Latin, or the trivium, or character formation? Today, we're joined by Dr. Robert Littlejohn, one of the pioneers of the modern classical movement, to answer a foundational question in our series on what exactly is classical Christian education. And in this conversation, not only do we address a definition, we discuss why it matters so much and why it's so urgently needed right now in this modern moment. Join us for this episode of Basecamp Live.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of Basecamp Live. Davies Owens, your host here with you on the journey of raising the next generation. I want to begin just by saying a big thank you to all of you for listening. You know, there is a lot competing for your time, more than ever before, in a world where long-form podcasts like this, which as much as we try to keep it short, we still end up always around 40-some minutes. It's hard because we're in a world of short form and things that are moving quickly. I came across a statistic recently that was pretty amazing and humbling. It's by an organization called Listen Notes, and they say that Basecamp Live is globally ranked in the top 1% of all podcasts. So I want to say thank you to you for making that possible. So keep listening and sharing what we're doing. We've been at this now for almost 10 years. We got a big anniversary coming up in November of 26. So a lot to celebrate, but none of it's possible without you hitting play every week amidst many, many choices. So thank you for that. And a big shout out in this episode to some special folks at schools around the country. Michelle Lee Thompson is head of school at Hand in Hand Christian Montessori School in Roseville, Minnesota. And then Mark Vertcake is head of school at Kalamazoo Christian School in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Thank you both and your school communities for listening and being a part of Basecamp Live and Zipcast. We certainly appreciate it, and appreciate all of you who share the good news, well, the gospel good news for sure, but share the good news of what we're doing on this podcast. You know, word of mouth is really what it's about. We don't do any real marketing. I don't have a huge social media presence. So it's really just been word of mouth, and I certainly appreciate that. Dr. Robert Littlejohn was on not too long ago here on Basecamp Live talking about his new book, Wisdom and Eloquence, which isn't really new. It's a reversioning of it just for parents that he did along with Chuck Evans. And you're going to hear later in this episode, we're giving away copies of it. So you'll want to stick around and get that information. Robert Littlejohn most recently served for 7 years as head of school at the Covenant School in Dallas, Texas. Previously served as head of school at Trinity Academy in Raleigh, North Carolina, and as vice president of academic affairs for Covenant College in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. Robert was the founding headmaster of the New Covenant Schools in Virginia, founding director and publisher for the Society for Classical Learning, and founding board member of American Schools in Lyon, France. He's an ordained Anglican cleric. He and his wife, Teresa, are parents of 3 adult children and 6 grandparents to 6 granddaughters. And Robert invites our listeners to connect with him through his website, wisdomandeloquence.org. You're going to hear, again, more about his resources. And as always, check out the show notes. In this particular episode, a big thank you to our sponsors, the folks at WisePhone, which is a fantastic alternative to your typical smartphone, but still has a lot of the practical things on it that you need. There's a discount code on our sponsor page on the website if you're interested. Again, thank you to Herzog Foundation, our great partners, that we are part of their network. And I have the privilege of being a coach in their parent engagement series. There's a lot of resources you want to check out from Herzog. And of course, our own Zipcast, which is part of what our bigger initiative is around parent engagement and communication in schools. In fact, we just launched at Zipcast brand new pricing for startup schools. There's so many of you that are just getting started. I talked to someone recently who said, we only have 17 people. I'm like, great, we're going to make it happen. We don't want any school to be left behind. We actually have schools that have sponsors from their school for each week's episode. So it actually works out that it doesn't even cost them to run Zipcast. Sign up for a consultation on your school's communication and try out our new free auditing tool on communication. All this and more at zipcast.media. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Robert Littlejohn. Robert, welcome back to Basecamp Live.
Thanks, Davies. Glad to be here. It's been a little while.
But, it's been a little while,
but
not too long. Well, for folks that didn't hear your past episode, which I do encourage people to go back, you've had a prolific and productive journey in this thing called classical Christian education, spanning many decades. Share with people a little bit of your journey if they don't know it.
Well, sure. You will appreciate this, but probably not as much as I appreciate this. When I got involved in the classical Christian school world, I think in fairness, I would say there were 4 schools that existed. And I was inspired by one of those schools, the one started by Douglas Wilson out in Idaho. I think he started Logos School in 1981. My son had occasion to attend there when I was on sabbatical at Washington State University, and we caught the bug. It's like, what is this? This is amazing. We can't go back to Virginia and not have this. So we went back and started school, New Covenant Schools in 1991, and I've been. Wow. It was drinking from a fire hose, and nobody knew what classical Christian education was back then. You literally were promoting a dream, and there wasn't data. How could you prove to prospective families that this was actually going to work? And now, what we have 1,500 schools in this movement, which is just astounding and glorious. It's not just on our continent either, right? You think about what's going on in Africa and
Brazil,
and Europe, and South America. It's amazing. But anyway, so I'm sort of the old timer now in this movement.
I would categorize you, Robert, when the day comes when they create the Hall of Fame. I would think that you would be there for sure. I mean, just very, elder statesman, early adopter. All kinds of accolades.
Well, right. Standing off to the side, perhaps. But anyway, it's just, all by God's grace that he brought this world to my attention and brought me into this world. It was life-changing, literally changed my career path early on. And I'm still one of classical Christian education's biggest fans. So it's exciting.
I got to ask, just thinking back to those early days, it's interesting to think about. We think we still have a hard time explaining what this whole thing is, which we're going to unpack a little bit here, even in this podcast. But back then in 91 or late 80s, this, like you said, this was just visional. There was not really anything to point to. What was it that was the most inspiring, attractive to you? What did you see that you thought, okay, this is really good and I've never seen it before? What drew you in?
Right. Well, it's the same thing that I recommend to prospective families. And, I went on sabbatical. I was a university professor. I went out to Washington State University to do scientific research for a semester. And we needed to enroll our son somewhere. And so we enrolled him at Logos School. I didn't know what it was. I basically, drove 8 miles from Pullman, Washington over to Moscow, Idaho. And I said, and I did know Doug Wilson. In fact, I knew the Wilsons well because I graduated Washington State University and had been involved in ministry with Doug's father and brother and knew the whole family. But I just said, basically, here, Doug, educate my child while I go work at the university over here. And a couple of weeks passed, and it was rough. The way I like to tell the story, my son he was so far behind in everything, and then he was having to take Latin on top of that. And what I like to say is that for every night for the first 2 weeks, there were lots of tears, and some of them were his, but most of them were ours as parents. But then it just clicked for him. It just clicked and things changed. He went from being frustrated and overwhelmed, and having been a student who was back in Virginia was bored. And as a result of being bored, he was entertaining his classmates and getting himself in trouble. But at the Logos School, he was challenged. He rose to that challenge. And we found both academically and spiritually, we were just watching a transformation take place before our very eyes. And it was so exciting. It was so different from anything we had ever experienced or even heard about in education. So the answer to your question, this is a long way to say it, but basically just seeing the effect that this approach to education had on our own son. It was amazing. And we couldn't not keep that for our kids when the sabbatical was over.
It's such a good answer in the sense that it's not just philosophical, it's practical. You saw this happen in your own family. And I think it's fascinating that, at face value, you'd think someone of the temperament at the time of your son who was maybe getting bored and restless and, like you put him in a classroom that's teaching Latin and ancient books, that seems like that's only going to make it worse. And in reality, he rose to the occasion because he wasn't being challenged enough. And so I think it's counterintuitive. It seems like in so many ways, we were talking before we started recording. I mean, this is definitely, we are by the day getting weirder and weirder in the eyes of the world. I mean, this seems like the last thing you would want to do for an energetic boy, put him in a classroom with a bunch of classical books. How could that make any sense? And yet it made a lot of sense.
That's right. But, again, I tell families all the time, to hear about this is one thing. And obviously word of mouth, testimonies from other families, from friends that these are important, but you have to experience it. You have to feel it. Yeah. And I'm happy to say that for a parent who hasn't been familiar with classical learning, to walk into a classical Christian school, they can feel the difference. Yeah. You just getting on campus, there's something different going on here. So I think that's the best draw, if you will. Yeah. But then obviously, getting some good information, reading about classical Christian education is second to that personal experience. And that, of course, if I do say so myself, that's why we wrote a book for that very purpose, Parent Education, Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents. So we think that does a good job for prospective parents as well as longtime families in the classical Christian tradition.
And I think it's really helpful the way you articulated that. I mean, for most of us, we are inspired by something we've seen. I remember my very, very first ever exposure, walked into a first grade class at a classical Christian school, and they all stood up and they greeted me by name. And I thought, I've never seen anything like this. Are these real kids? Are they, it seemed very wooden, honestly, the first impression I got. And then within 5 minutes, they're joyfully, learning and laughing and engaging. And I thought there's something intriguing about it, but you've got to move from just inspiration to understanding. And I love that you have, spent so much time over the decades writing and helping parents really put, meat on the bones of what is this thing and understanding. And of course, if folks did not hear the interview we did most recently on the new version of Wisdom and Eloquence for parents is absolutely we're going to talk more about the book in just a bit, but I appreciate you helping to bring this to life, because I do think there are a lot of parents, perhaps all of us have been on this same journey, Robert, where we somehow stumbled into a classical school. We're hopefully inspired by things that we saw, even if we didn't understand it. The challenge, I think, is once you kind of get going down the road, and as you described it, there was the tears of your son, perhaps tears on your part. And I think modern families are probably even more likely to hit tears and think, oh, this is just too hard. Maybe I'm making a mistake. I'm messing my child up. And it'd be interesting if it were present day, there might be an easier to hit an eject button versus just doubling down and pressing through. And so, what were the things when you hit those early friction points that caused you to keep going and not run down to the school down the street where the homework was a lot less and there were fewer tears?
Oh, well, right. What a great question. And I guess I left that out because, I mean, for 2 weeks, we felt like, we've made a terrible mistake. Yeah. Our son can't do this. But, as we explored together as a family, whether that was a true statement, the failure wasn't in enrolling him at the Logos school. The failure had been having him in, frankly, a progressive public school for the previous 3 years. And that's where he just wasn't being challenged and he wasn't learning. He just wasn't learning. So knowing already, well, we don't want to go back to that. So let's give it a few more days and see how it goes. And thankfully, in our case, it pretty quickly began to go well. It may not qualify me to encourage families who have a little bit longer lead in than we had, but yeah, I do encourage families, if your child is struggling, hang in there, because yeah, it's going to click, and they're going to be far better off, not just educationally, but just, I believe, in life in general, because of having been in this approach to education rather than the limiting alternatives.
Well, and just one final point on this, because I think your story is just so relevant to so many people. The friction that your son experienced was primarily he was not accustomed to being challenged at all. So, and again, at face value, you think, why would any child have a problem? I mean, you can see why any child would have a problem with just now I'm being asked to do more work, but it was actually, the work was what eventually was what inspired him, because he wanted to do something that mattered. And I think so many kids are sort of bored and don't get the point, and they're just floating through this school thing with very little call to anything of greatness. And that causes you to not want to flourish. You want to get out and go do something that matters. So I think that's
right. And the thing that we dismiss too often is that the thing that really inspires children and brings them joy more than anything else is succeeding, finding that they actually can accomplish what's set before them. And it really gets them, it builds their self-confidence.
Right.
And we experienced that with my son, particularly with Latin. He had never had Latin before. He came in the middle of the year, so he's way behind in that. But, and the other thing is, this was something that he found he could do that his parents didn't know and perhaps couldn't do.
Right.
So studying Latin together every night became our greatest, parent-son activity. But hey, Davies, let me just mention one other thing, though, and that is the reason to get into a classical Christian school and to a classroom and experience it is that you will see there, as a prospective parent, you will see there the difference. And I was reminded of this literally 35 years from when I first experienced it, when Karen Elliott with the Rafiki Foundation invited Teresa, my wife, and me to Nairobi, Kenya, to visit the Rafiki village there, but not just the Rafiki village. We went to a local, a private school, not affiliated with Rafiki, but an independent school that had adopted the Rafiki curriculum, which is solidly classical Christian. And in 1 year, we observed students who were about to wrap up their first year of education. Teresa and I sat for, almost 2 hours. We sat and observed a first grade class. And Davies, we were blown away. I mean, it was amazing what these little Kenyan students could do. And when I would contrast what I saw there with what other first grade Nairobi Kenyan children are doing, the contrast, the chasm is greater than what I've seen now for 35 years in the United States. We see this huge difference, but to see it over there, it's like we've seen this work I have for 35 years in the United States, but to see it work almost even better. Yeah. To have even greater impact over there in Kenya. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
We like to say it's not that it works because it's a centuries old approach to education. It's a centuries old approach because it works. We keep doing it because it works.
That's really well said. I want to take a break and come back, and let's build on that comment you just made, because I'm thinking of a story actually of a parent who ended up leaving one of the schools that I was a part of. His son was in middle school, and I remember on the exit interview, he literally said to me, Davies, I just don't understand. I don't understand why you guys are so, and his quote was, you are so fixated on these people that wear sandals and togas and robes, and you're out of touch with what children need today. I mean, this was literally what caused him to exit the school. And what I hear you saying is that there's something timeless here, and it's not about togas and robes or togas are robes, but or sandals and all these things. There's so much more going on here. And I think I'd love to have you unpack that a little bit, because this is such the right education for the modern moment. So let's take a break and we'll come back and continue the conversation.
The road to graduation begins early and takes many paths. And without a skilled guide, it can feel overwhelming. The career coaches at Life Architects empower students to discover who God created them to be through our unique vocational discipleship model. You can bring this graduation game changer to your school through one-on-one student coaching, on-campus workshops, or even faculty training. Visit lifearchitectscoaching.com today.
Hi there, classical Christian parents, students, and teachers. This is Robert Littlejohn, co-author with Charles Evans of Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian paradigm for classical learning, published by Crossway Books. We want you to know about our new book with well-known family counselor Keith McCurdy, published by Classical Academic Press. The book is titled Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents: How Classical Christian Education Can Transform Your Children, Your Family, and the World. We have written this shorter, parent-focused book specifically as an admissions and parent education resource for schools and families. We are excited to be proud sponsors of Zipcast and Basecamp Live, and we hope you are enjoying these two great resources for classical learning as much as we are. And we would invite you to visit our website, wisdomandeloquence.org, to explore the various services offered by the authors of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, and to let us know how we can best serve you. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
So, Robert, I'm curious if you'd been there with me with these parents that were leaving the school because we seem to be out of touch with modernity and we're doing old-fashioned things that didn't make a lot of sense. What would you say to that? Given what you were just saying before the break about the observations of these timeless truths of education?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how long ago that was, Davies, but again, early on for me, there were anecdotes, but we didn't have data. And I'm excited that in the last 5 years, we really, there are a couple of studies have come out that have included classical Christian schools, classical Christian homeschools, classical Christian curriculum as they compare to other approaches to education. And, the evidence is just overwhelming. It's just students who receive a classical Christian education. For starters, literally, it forms the brain differently. So they are able to think in ways that students who have some other form of education aren't able to do. And we're seeing lifelong impact. I think, again, anecdotally of my own children who to this day, they're in their 40s, and they would say that nothing apart from walking with Christ, nothing has impacted their lives more than their classical Christian education. And again, the data through surveying now hundreds, if not thousands of graduates indicate the same thing. Just graduates of classical Christian schools are outperforming graduates of other schools in all kinds of ways. So there's that. We now have evidence. But even looking back then, I think of that parent probably was thinking about STEM. Mm-hmm. Probably this is what often has over the 2-3 decades of classical Christian schooling. What draws families away, and it happens often after middle school or during middle school, they're drawn away because they feel like, well, my child needs. You guys don't have a lot of computers in your classroom. Your students aren't holding iPads and computers, and that's what kids need these days. But the interesting thing is that those who are in the tech field, adults working in the tech field, have an entirely different view. They know that their children shouldn't be educated using technology the way that so many schools are doing that. In fact, Steve Jobs famously said this: it's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. and this I love. He says, it's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the results that make our hearts sing. So he as a leader in the tech field, understood that it's the liberal arts and sciences, it's the humanities, it's the very disciplines that the classical Christian schools cover so beautifully.
Yeah.
That prepares our graduates in ways that students who just focused on STEM, for example, just aren't prepared for.
Yeah, and that's again, there's so many contemporary examples of that. Steve Jobs is one, but of tech gurus that are putting their children in schools that are more liberal arts based. I just see that, you see that the tech training can get brought in later, but if you know how to problem solve and reason well, and that critical thinking is something that is so often developed better
That's right.
in a liberal arts type of environment.
Well, and it seems a simple understanding, but it's hard, I think, to swallow. We all know that technology changes so rapidly. So if kids are focusing on a technology training in their middle and high school years, that's going to be passé by the time that they are out and ready to engage with and use technology. So they need something else. And what they need is, again, a liberal arts and sciences education that prepares the human being, that prepares the brain in such a way that the things learned, the skills, the knowledge, the virtues acquired in a classical Christian school setting are transferable to any aspect of life, not just future learning, but future relationships, future endeavors, future employment.
So staying with this conversation with this, exiting family, I think the points you're making would resonate, but I could also see them pushing back and saying, well, that's great. Okay. So liberal arts is important, but why do you have to selectively pick from the oldest versions of these things? I mean, aren't there kind of contemporary writings and contemporary people that are having conversations? Why does everything have to have dust on it to be significant in your world? I mean, what's this idea of, the great books? Can't you start with books that are 50 years old? I mean, you hear these things, I think, out of concern again, that their children are going to be hurt or left behind because we're just kind of the nostalgic Amish people over here. I mean, there's more to it than that, obviously.
Right. Well, and there are wonderful books. I could call them great books that have been written in the last 50 years and are being written. But it's interesting how much we are building upon the wisdom of the past. Right. So if it weren't for those early works and our understanding of them, then we couldn't be writing books as good these days. I don't think I'm answering the question well, but it really is this great conversation that has its roots in antiquity, has been ongoing now for literally for centuries, and engaging our students and engaging ourselves. By the way, I think, one of the things that's so good for parents to do is learn alongside your children while they're going through it, because most parents, I think this is still the case, most parents whose children are in a classical Christian school setting have not themselves had a classical education. So again, the family, the father doesn't understand because it's not his own experience. Increasingly, I'm happy to say, alumni of classical Christian schools are enrolling their children. So there's sort of that legacy enrollment occurring, and they do have a better understanding. Yeah. But the great conversation, engaging our students with the best ideas that have ever been thought, if you will, and that have been recorded over a period of centuries. I mean, clearly, we don't just linger back in the, before Christ days of classical learning. We study, we expose our students to great works that have emerged over the progression of time. But again, it's all part of this ongoing great conversation.
I know, I mean, again, you go into great depths in Wisdom and Eloquence to try to help us understand these transcendent things that are living ideas or a feast of ideas that just at core define what does it mean to be human. I mean, every human is born with this set of curiosities about why am I here and who am I and what's my purpose. And those transcendent ideas are always going to be the same for any human, regardless of what century they live in. And so you're saying that part of what we do is we basically go back and we find the best iterations or, best conversations that have happened and enter back into those, even if they were 500 years ago, because it's really, people are people. These conversations are always going to be relevant.
Absolutely. And, people's sensibilities and understandings, if you will, are different over time. And so unless we engage with authors who predate us by a very, very long time, we can't even begin to understand the world in the ways that they understood the world. So we are bettered by engaging with those concepts and those ideas that were born ages ago.
So even if you're wearing sandals and toga, you're still human, and whatever you struggled with is probably very similar to what somebody today is struggling with in terms of who they are and what life is about. And
absolutely, it's like you said. In fact, the way I have called it is that classical education, even if I just say it without the word Christian in there, classical education has always been religious in nature. Yeah. And when I say religious in nature, sometimes I substitute belief based, because ancient Greek philosophers were not Christians, obviously. Yeah. But they were seeking the same deep truths of life. They were pursuing cosmic questions of origins and meaning, and they were looking to what we would describe as mythology, Greek mythology. Yeah. They were looking to the gods of their day. The Hebrews, I love the first chapter of Daniel, which I think is a beautiful description of classical Hebrew education, classical theistic education. And then Augustine, I think in 4th century AD, really brought together Christianity with what went on before the time of Christ and before Christianity was born in the development of a classical approach to education.
Is it too, I've heard this said, and get your reaction to it. I don't know if this is oversimplifying it, but effectively it was at the point in human history where the Greeks and the Romans were alive, where classical philosophy formed the questions in the most important and articulate way. Like, here's what the core questions of what does it mean to be human. They didn't get the answers right. They were throwing a lot of pagan answers at it. But it was at that point that Christ came, incarnationally into the world to then bring the answers to those questions that were so well framed. And so the last 2,000 years has really been, Christian tradition on articulating and unpacking through great books and stories the articulated answers to those questions that perhaps were best initiated by the Greeks and Romans. I mean, again, it's a bit of an oversimplification of all of human history, but is there some truth in all of that?
No, I like that. And I think, again, thinking of your parent who was choosing to leave, when our students engage these great works that predate Christ, but they do it from a Christian world and life view perspective, which of course they are actively developing as part of their classical Christian education, then they're drawing conclusions, they're forming answers to these questions exactly as you just described. So, Christ brings an entirely different understanding of these great works than would have been had at the time.
So maybe a new marketing campaign for classical schools is, we've got the right questions. Do you have the right answers? Come find it. We can give you the questions, and here are they.
Or learn to generate the right answers.
The right answer, right? Exactly. So let's take one final break. We're going to come back. We've got some not only continuation of this conversation, but I want to. We're going to share with some folks a really exciting opportunity to even get a copy of your book. So we'll be right back after the break. During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. If you're seeking an education that helps your child thrive academically and spiritually, Wilson Hill Academy has spent years developing a model that I want you to know about. In their free guide, you'll see how their thoughtfully sequenced curriculum prepares students for college and how a biblical worldview helps them understand the world around them with clarity, and how their discussion-based classes teach them to think critically, not just what to think. You'll also discover how their teachers equip students to live purposefully for Christ. With accredited live online classes, your child can learn from master teachers anywhere with an internet connection, all within a community that has transformed families like yours. Download their free guide today at wilsonhillacademy.com/guide or in the link in our show notes. Robert, there's so many distinctive aspects of classical Christian education, and many of them do cause parents and maybe even faculty at times to think, are we sure we're doing what needs to be done in the modern world today? And so we've talked about all of the great books and the distinctives with even teaching Latin. And then there's things like logic. Like, why would we want middle schoolers to take logic? There are things that there's good sound reason. Share with us some of those reasons for why we do the unique things we do.
Okay, well, let me go ahead and talk about logic, but then I'm going to transition over to what really matters most to me in this approach to education. Yeah. So teaching students logic in the middle school years is part and parcel of what we say is teaching with the grain. And more recently, I've said teaching with the brain. Children learn differently at different stages of their life. And everyone knows that a middle school student is argumentative and a little prickly and resistant. And this is the perfect time to engage them in a study of logic because we want them, they're going to argue anyway. So let's teach them to argue well and to become good at engaging other people in, at times, lively debate. You know, would that our whole culture could engage in civil discourse the way that we used to decades ago. But that's what we're teaching our students to do, largely beginning in the middle school years and beginning with the instruction in logic. Yeah. That obviously transitions into instruction in classical rhetoric, and they become winsome communicators and really develop an ability not to argue someone down, not to beat someone in a debate, but to, in a winsome way, persuade them of their own point of view. And our hope and prayer is, but by the time they graduate, that their own point of view is absolutely consistent with the Word of God and inspired by the teachings of Jesus and the prophets through the Scriptures.
That's a great answer, Robert. And I think to just the comment you made. We live in a culture right now and everyone recognizes we've lost even the ability for basic civil discourse. So we're not just teaching children to move into a world and get a job. We're teaching them actually to be better humans, to be able to live well with their neighbor. And these are, again, core essential aspects of what does it mean to live well in a broken world. And so these are big things that we're doing together. What else would you you had some other thoughts you wanted to share here.
Well, right. And again, most importantly to me, as a young university professor, I would encounter increasing numbers of young people whom I knew grew up in a Christian home, attended church all their young lives, even perhaps graduated from a Christian school, and yet arriving at college, they would walk away from their faith of 18 years. And I didn't want that for my own children or for other children whom I would influence through the classical Christian school movement. And so I realized that it's not just a matter of taking progressive education, if you will, and tacking on prayer and Bible study, chapel, for example. We need an approach to education that is wholly different than the education that's the other forms of education that are out there. We need an education that's not progressive, that's rooted in classical antiquity, but also, most importantly, is rooted in the Word of God, so that every aspect of what we study, day in, day out, every aspect of what we do, every conversation we have is enlightened by the Scripture, that we truly integrate faith with every aspect of learning. And frankly, we integrate every aspect of learning with one another. Again, like Steve Jobs was talking about, we don't study chemistry in isolation or ancient history in isolation. We want to see how one discipline speaks to another, so that our kids realize there is integrity, there is a wholeness, there's a completeness in the universe and in all of these disciplines, frankly, all of which point us to the living and true God who created all of it. So we really see a difference with our graduates. Again, anecdotally, we've seen this for decades, but now we're seeing the research that indicates that, yes, we, by God's grace and through the work of the Holy Spirit, as we partner with Him, we are helping our students to gain what I like to call sticky faith, so that after they leave mom and dad for college, they leave our faculty and our schools for college and for life beyond college, they persist in a life of faith because, well, again, it's God's doing, but they do that because they've engaged truth differently than they would with any other approach to education.
That's so well said, and I'm sure everyone listening is cheering and saying, "Of course, that's what we want. We want resilient young people with sticky faith that can navigate a very complicated world." And that's got to be more than when you were describing it, I think about, what we're not about is just reading, writing, arithmetic with some Jesus sprinkles dumped on top. I mean, that's kind of I think a lot of times Christian education becomes, we do that on that's third period chapel, or we do, no, it's integrated everything, as is life. So there's such a beauty in all that. Well, I know time is never enough. I want to give you a chance to share a little bit about the book. Again, we've got a whole podcast we did not too long ago on the reframing of Wisdom and Eloquence. I've had the book Wisdom and Eloquence that you wrote. Gosh, when was the first version? It was a much more substantive version for administrators, I suppose. That one came out when?
That was published in 2006 by Crossway Books, and really written for educators. And really has that focus. And you know what, Davies, I'm excited that that book is still in use. I literally just engaged with Crossway Books yesterday, who is offering a discount to a school that wants to purchase 50 copies of the original Wisdom and Eloquence for faculty professional development coming up in July. So that's exciting.
It is an excellent book, but it was always a little bit, it's a deep dive. And I think that what you've done in the new version for parents much of our conversation here is just trying to help break this down in a way that's just at a more accessible level. So mention what you've done.
Well, So Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents acknowledges that the first book, Wisdom and Eloquence, was really written for educators and perhaps missed parents as a target audience a bit. So this book, it's about 65% brand new material, which is good, because I think about this. Our first book was published in 2006. And you know what? The iPhone was first introduced to the world in 2007. So a lot has changed since 2006. And we capture that in this shorter volume. It's about half the length of the original book. And it really does focus on parents and parent education. And I think it's a good resource for schools who are entertaining prospective families, and for parents, whether they're homeschooling or whatever their need to better understand classical Christian education.
It's certainly a great gift. And I know when I was head of school, you're always clamoring for what can I give someone that's not going to overwhelm them, but also be substantive enough to really answer the hard questions. So I love the book. We have a special announcement because of the generosity, your generosity and the publishers, of giving away a number of copies of Wisdom and Eloquence. And we're going to be doing this just for a limited time. I know if you're listening and this episode just dropped, there's a good chance you can get a copy. If you're listening this year later, I don't know, you can still send an email over and we'll see. Maybe you'll still 2 years from now be willing to send a copy, but we'll try to do this with a limited period of time. So we're going to put, Robert, I guess, an email into our show notes. And if you want to drop down and hit that email in the show notes and just say, hey, I heard the episode. I'd love to get a copy, and we'll see if there's still enough available.
Right. So that'll have an email coming directly to me, and I'm just going to say, that as long as supplies last, we'll respond by getting a copy of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, published by Classical Academic Press, out to whoever wants it, free of charge.
But especially if you're a school administrator and you have not seen the book, I think it'd be great for you to get a copy and then have that available to be able to endorse to your families, because it's a great resource. So, Robert, thanks for being so generous and making that available. It's fun to do a giveaway. Maybe we should do more giveways here on Basecamp Live. People love giveaways.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to give credit where credit's due. Davies, it was your idea. I love the idea. Thanks for doing that. And it's just is part and parcel of just all the great topics that you're covering on Basecamp Live, and all the content you're putting out on Zipcast. I'm loving it. Your audience may not know that I'm recently retired from being a head of school, but still very interested and active in the classical Christian school movement. And I'm still learning from what I hear on Basecamp Live. So,
well, I know people, we began our conversation with you recounting all the episodes that you've been listening to. I love that. So I appreciate your contribution. And I don't see you really retiring. You have the idea, when I hear wisdom and eloquence, I think of you. You are literally now the embodiment of someone who's gone this distance over the decades. You've got the perspective that you shared. And boy, we have a world that needs wisdom and eloquence right now. And I just love that you're continuing to champion that in all of our lives. So we'll definitely have you back on again. But hopefully folks will drop down and hit that email and get a copy of your book. Thank you so much, Robert.
Please do. Thank you, Davies.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Basecamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging, as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.